In the previous chapter, I outlined 3 roles that humans can play. These are called the 3 ego states in transactional analysis. And actually there are 5 because there are 2 parts of parent, or there are 2 types of parent and 2 types of child. So we have the critical parent and the nurturing parent. We have the adult, and then we have the adapted child and the free child. So these are the 5 different roles that we can play at any given time. And so the parent isn't reserved for moms and dads, just as the child isn't reserved for boys and girls. Any grown-up can play any one of those 5, and often do, and can shift between them depending on the context and the relationships. The purpose of this lecture is to take this a little bit further. Instead of looking only inside of a person, looking at how one person interacts with another. This is called the social transaction, and it's at the base of transactional analysis. Looking only at the structure of the personality, or those ego states, that's called structural analysis. So with transactional analysis, we have the basic unit of a social interaction, which is called a transaction. The simplest transaction is hello, to which one responds hello, or how are you? Fine, and you. And so these are very balanced, equal, simple social transactions or social interactions. And we know that if someone says hello and you do not respond to them, you've just snubbed them. You've just put them down. You've probably taken them down a peg. You've irritated them. What you've done is taboo socially. You should at least acknowledge them, if not, give back to them exactly what they gave to you. So if they ask you about your weekend, you need to ask them about their weekend. These are some expectations about social interactions. So I can ask you a question as though I were a parent, playing the role of parent. I can ask you a question from the role of adult, and I can ask you a question from the role of child. And hopefully, after watching the first lecture or reading a chapter on personality, you could almost predict what those would sound like. So the parent, when asking questions, would be in a very parental, judgmental, possibly critical or nurturing role. A child would be in a helpless role. An adult would simply be looking for information. So I might, when asking about your weekend, as a parent, because I have in mind what you should have done over the weekend, I might say, so how did the chores go this weekend? Implying that you must have done chores, or how many chores did you accomplish this weekend, as though I'm talking to my child who had a set of tasks to follow. So the question asked as a parent is usually looking for dirt or being critical. The question asked as an adult is simply looking for information. How did you spend your weekend? Oh, I spent my weekend first doing A, then B, then C, then D, right? A careful catalog of the events. And then a child might ask a question, how am I supposed to spend my weekends? Right? Like, tell me what I need to be doing. And so each of those, the question is pretty similar, but it's asked with a different goal, a different posture, a different tone of voice. The role being played is radically different. So an example of that would be a parent-to-child stimulus, or a parent-to-child interaction, where mom or dad says to son or daughter, put away the video games and work on your homework. So this is a command. So that is clearly a parent talking to a child. And so how does a child respond? Yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, right? It's a very child response, a submissive response to a parent. And that, of course, can happen between adults. A boss says to a worker, get those files on my desk by 5 p.m. Yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, right? Get that right back. So that was a parent-to-child interaction. Even though in the second example, I'm not talking about moms and dads, I'm talking about one adult to another. The boss may even be younger than the worker. What if the worker were to say, those reports were due by Murphy, not me? And so that would be like a challenge. So that was a parent-to-child. Rather than saying, yes, sir, it was you have your facts mistaken. That would be an adult-to-an-adult transaction. So the transaction was not complimentary. What the boss was hoping for was a yes, and instead got information. And so that would be a cross transaction. So the boss either has to do, well, I'm asking you for it now, you better get it to me by 5 p.m. and reassert that authority, or say, all right, well, I guess to solve this problem as an adult, I better talk to Murphy instead. So I talked about complementary transactions and cross transactions. The last one is a duplex transaction. This is when you say something on the surface, but there's an ulterior motive there too. You're actually saying a little bit more. You don't come out and say it exactly, but it's implied. So with this, I like the example of like a student comes into the classroom 5 minutes late. So I've already started lecturing, and a student walks in, and I say, hey, to the student who came in, what time is it? And so on the surface, that's an adult-to-adult question. I'm asking for information. If the student goes, it's 11:05, then this student has given me the information I've asked for. And so it's an adult-to-an-adult, and then a response adult-to-adult complementary transaction. But beneath the surface, you might even feel that I'm being critical of this student. And the student will feel like I'm asking him why he's 5 minutes late. And so ulteriorly, or on a duplex level, it's a parent to child, you shouldn't arrive 5 minutes late. I might also ask, do you own a watch? And say it that way. It's asking for information, which is an adult-to-an-adult transaction, but the implication there is something else. There's an ulterior motive, and it's parent to child. You ought to be better at spending your time. I asked students for examples, and they came up with really good ones. If you see a friend in the morning and her hair is all ratted, messed up, and her makeup isn't very good, rather than say, you look terrible, you can ask another question, like, how are you feeling? Maybe, so the implication there is maybe you're sick and that's why you're a wreck. So this is something that a student shared. And so on the surface, you ask a simple, safe question, but the ulterior motive, you're almost inviting them to tell you why they look so terrible today. And if they don't, then you just let it go because it's evidently too much to talk about. Simple things can become complicated by the words that we use, especially when we're not sure what role we're playing. And so I gave the example of an email that went out to the entire university from an administrator after some students got in trouble and the police showed up. And so the email was something to the effect of, an incident happened that was illegal and students got punished, and that's all information, adult to adult. And so this administrator was sharing information, making sure everyone was on the same page and understood what happened. But then there were lines that said things like, so rather than just saying students got in trouble, disappointing students got in trouble. And so there was like kind of a finger wagging element to this, like, you shouldn't misbehave. I expect more of you. These are all very parent things to say to children. And so when you're talking about something, and like maybe your friend has a difficult decision to make, and so you're trying to reason through this, maybe it's a decision about staying in a relationship. And if as the friend you keep saying things like, well, the responsible thing to do would be, or what you ought to do would be, and this is all judgmental, it's critical, and it's not really dealing with the facts, with the material of the objective material and information there. So a big push here is to always return to the adult when you're simply dealing with information. That way, if someone asks you a question like, hey, where did you get that shirt? You don't think, oh, is it inexpensive? Is it cheap? Should I be embarrassed? It's like, no, that was just information. If you receive questions as an adult, then you would give information out as an adult and not always jump to a conclusion that there's some ulterior motive. So we'll get to more of this when we start looking at emotion and perception, and then especially personal problems and psychological problems, and then what it means to get well.